conventional nuclear has the problem is it cannot expand fast enough to be useful. We're taking like 25 years to build a single reactor. As I understand it, there's 6 or 7 years of build time in that, but the incubation period of getting permits and through it's taking such a long time to bring reactors online, and so even if we brought online 25 new reactors of average size a year, each year and every year from 2025 onwards, we would chew through all our uranium reserves that we've got at the moment in about 75 years. Now, we can go and find more. That's not a problem. Right. But in that 75 years, we get like about 60% of the way there for nuclear to generate enough power to become the next energy system that underpins everything.
Today on the show, I have a highly acclaimed returning guest. You guys wanted it, you guys got it. Simon Michaux is back on the show. No, I did not intend for that to rhyme, but I'll take it nonetheless. So, Simon, thank you for coming back on, my friend.
Hello. Good to see you again.
Yeah, so for anyone that hasn't seen the first interview that I did with Simon Michaux, for lack of a better term, it was quite, straight up a banger. So I highly recommend you go back and watch that. I'll link it down below in the description box. He just came in with all the charts. He was cooking. So, highly recommend. Highly recommend you watch that. And I highly recommend you watch this interview too. So, Simon, for those who may have not seen the first interview or who may be coming across your name for the first time, kind of give us a quick intro who you are.
Okay. Associate Professor Simon Michaux, Geological Survey of Finland, basic training degree in physics and geology, and a PhD in mining engineering in explosives. Research and development in the Australian mining industry for 18 years in geometallurgy and comminution rock breakage. Then I left all that and joined the private sector supporting feasibility studies. I left Australia and I left mining, come to Europe in Belgium to learn industrial recycling and circular economy. And from there, I came to Finland to learn in mineral intelligence and now circular economy solutions. So the work I'm doing is to, among other things, is to actually examine what exactly is involved to phase out fossil fuels.
Yeah. So that's the question of our time at the moment, right? Because energy is ubiquitous. Energy is we're swimming in an ocean of energy as we speak right now. So,
right.
Just to answer the energy question is to answer whether or not humanity, as we know it, continues to move forward. The ascent of man continues. So,
right, and so my work is to showcase, or at least show, our existing thinking is not good enough. But there are solution vectors out of this. There are multiple solution vectors, and some of them are in our past. Right. And so some of them are in our past, some of them are put together in a new way. What I'm sort of seeing is a general reluctance to undertake new things. Everyone wants the magic bullet that they've already been talked about. So, but I've been presenting to some high level people, and I'm not getting to my face. Everyone I present my information to does not refute my work. It's the people, the armchair warriors on Twitter, and usually the people attached to the green transition in some kind of finance way. They tend to get very hot under the collar about my work, but the people to my face are generally quite supportive. They're not rejecting it; they just don't know what to do. And so I'm finding a lot of politicians are asking me, what are their options? Like, what are they can do about this? And a lot of them will say, we'd like to check your works. All right. So I give them my assumptions, and then their staff goes off and actually repeats what I've done. And so that's happened a couple of times now.
So kind of go ahead.
No, there's a bit of a lag. Sorry, mate.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Kind of give us an update. So you've been, since we last spoke, you've been going around meeting with all these high level policymakers. And what I'm kind of getting here at is, so you're presenting the work. They're not necessarily rejecting it, but are they just throwing their hands up and saying, "What do we do?" Or like,
So
how are they reacting?
there's a bit of deer in headlights, because I'm presenting information to them that they've never really considered. Now, what I'm just saying is when we do problem solving at the moment, it generally comes down to money. Like, where do we get the money from? For the first time, they're being asked to consider where do they get the raw materials from? And so what I'm saying is, does their ability to procure the items like solar panels and wind turbines, is that going to be reliable? Because the people who would normally procure them from are now going to have raw material supply shortfalls. And this is something that they've never really considered before. The world so far has actually run on abundance of all sorts of things, money, raw materials. It hasn't felt that way. But when you look at the data, if we want to do something, we can just print more money at a federal level, and resources were abundant and they were cheap, and energy was really cheap. Now we're moving into a different era where everything's going wrong, one damn thing after another.
It's
And so,
happening all at once, right? So
yeah.
you can't solve these problems sequentially. You've got to solve them simultaneously.
Hmm. Or they're all connected to the same thing, and it's the same fundamental problem that needs to be resolved. But we are now paying the price for not doing due diligence. We use ideology to plan for the future, which is, fine. We've all got our beliefs, right? So, but what we haven't been doing is checking the numbers behind that ideology up against reality.
Yeah. So
And so,
you mentioned one thing that's it's kind of the umbrella, the common thread here. What is that one thing?
right. So right through everything is our understanding of the world. It's the perception of how we see things and how we do our problem solving. It's like we energy is the master resource, right? It's another thing to say, like everything we've achieved so far comes down to 6 inches of topsoil for the last 10,000 years, right? These things are so fundamental that we haven't actually remembered them, right? And so what's through everything is we don't have the ability to problem solve. We don't problem solve. We are told what to think and what to do, and we are very surprised when something doesn't work, right? And we tend to get very argumentative with each other when our beliefs are challenged. We don't debate. So I'm finding this both the underlying thread is that we are human perception is both the problem but also the solution. And we've become dependent on the systems around us to do things. Like there was a time when we were the strongest link in the chain, and so when something needed to be done, we could do it and we could respond quickly. Now we are dependent on so many systems around us to do things for us, to the point where we're almost like what they call a post turtle. You've got a post in the field, and someone's put a turtle on top of it, and its legs are going everywhere, and it can't get off. It's a slang term in Australia. You're about as useful as a post turtle. But so we've become very dependent on these systems that have become so exotic and esoteric that we can't really understand them at an individual level most of the time, and we've got to get a specialist to actually go in and fix things for us. And so we're not even aware of problems, and we don't even see these things. Anyway, so I've been when I talk to a lot of people, there's a momentum of the existing system. Everyone's trapped. Like a politician, for example, traditionally, there's very limitations of what they can do or what they can't do. And um, what I any options of problem solving going forward usually means they'll destroy their career, and the person who replaces them is probably not going to do things anyway. And so there's this feeling of futility. On the other hand, there are other solutions on the ground that we could use if we think differently and we step outside that system. And I'm now actually starting to think in those terms.
Yeah. So we're so used to a world that we've lived in for the last hundred some odd years. So growth is rapid. They're really, the sky's the limit. And you kind of look at this thing in conjunction with like something that the Fed's doing, which was
Yeah,
hiking rates all the way up from 0 to 5%, 5.5% within the span of a year and a half or so. Now, Paul Volcker may have been able to pull that off in the 80s, but the difference between what Paul Volcker was dealing with and what Jerome Powell was dealing with was that Paul Volcker was in the middle of a rapid growth episode of
yeah,
humanity. So you were able to kind of increase rates to an astronomically high number, but you could also you could also economize your way out of it. People were very productive. It was a lot easier to get oil out of the ground, get energy, EROI. I know as flawed of a
mm,
metric as it is, it was still, it was much higher than it is today.
yeah,
Fast forward
correct.
to today, you can't apply the same prescription because we can't get the energy out of the ground as readily as we could back in the 80s. And energy is correlated with productivity and value. So you can't really grow your way out of this debt bubble, which is what these higher rates are doing. Now, he came in yesterday and he said that there won't be any rate hikes anymore for 2024. And there's actually some signals in the market that you're looking at somewhere around 3 rate cuts. But the yield curve is actually signaling around more than that, actually. So it's actually under 4%, the 10-year, that is. So there's probably more rate cuts to come because, it's kind of an inevitability, right?
Mm.
So where, so how does kind of the economy maneuver given the current outlook on all of these energy bottlenecks, do you think?
So my current thinking is come to this point. Instead of actually trying to go somewhere and apply a solution within an existing system. So instead of actually sort of going to like an industrial sector and starting a new idea, right? You could do that, but there's a lot of human systems like like building codes and market acceptance and legislation that prevents you from doing things. Right. So now my thinking is in step outside of all of these system structures, go somewhere and start from scratch and build an idea where the idea is built up from nothing. So it's self-sufficient and it's self-supporting. So when the rest of the system starts to deteriorate in whatever system you're looking at, whether it's money or energy or food production, you've now got an alternative that is actually able to survive in the current market conditions. Right. And so how can the economy survive? Okay. So um, starts identify what we
Or
need to
can it?
do. No, its transformation is inevitable, right? People say destruction, but actually it's transformation. It's going to be quite a disruptive transformation, and the people in charge are going to try and direct it to become something else, and that something else benefits them. Whereas what we will probably do is that something else may not be very good for us. So we're going to try and direct it to something further again in a different direction, even. We're not going to go along with that. How to, crushing poverty, food shortages, material shortages of all kinds. But the very people who allowed this situation to get so bad are now telling us that tighten our belt and get behind them and do as they ask, when it's clear that that plan not only won't work very well, but it benefits them and maintains their power structures. So I can see sort of, large sections of humanity just said, yeah, we're going to do things our way now. And as for how that will work, well, that'll be different all over the world. And it will come down to culture and the areas of the culture that they can still collaborate together and in terms of trust and respect will do better than those who are at war with each other.
So,
So,
so you've
yeah,
been in the room with these people. What's
yeah.
kind of your feeling from it? Like, are they genuinely clueless about this stuff, or is there sort of like a Malthusian element, do you sense, behind it?
No, everyone I've met so far, well, that's not quite true, I suppose. But most people I've met so far, they've got this is a massive system with and everyone's got like a tiny little job to do.
Yeah. The left hand doesn't know what the right is doing.
Their job is to turn this particular cog in the larger machine, right? And so their job is pretty well defined, and their limitations are pretty well defined. So much so that there's quite a narrow efficiency peak. It's a very rare individual has the latitude to do stuff in the system. You've got people with entrepreneurs, anyone who's got like money behind them, they're independently wealthy, right, and have got enough liquidity to do things themselves off the cuff. They can do things. But most politicians that you come across, they've got a job to do. So the feeling is they're normal people. They intuitively know something is very, very wrong. They can't quite put their finger on it, right? But they're also in a position whereas if they would actually start talking about this stuff out loud, they would find themselves in an untenable position professionally, right? And so they're trying to respond to the challenges they're seeing with the tools that they're allowed to have out in the open, right? And so what do I do about this? We're geared at the moment where everything's got to be a free market enterprise, and the free market enterprises, we're here to make money, but the underlying things that make all the system work at such a fundamental level are deteriorating, and they're the sorts of things that we don't necessarily talk about very often. Right. So we're in this sort of odd sort of situation. Anyway, so the feeling I've sort of come across is people are having trouble getting their arms around this, and they're wondering what to do about it. They're also wondering how much of this, okay, they can see the problem, but in their mandate to operate, is it them that actually responds or it's someone else? And no one knows what to do because who is that someone else? And this is the system we have evolved into over the last century. Say 500 years ago, we'd be all in, say, like a town, and everyone could go talk to. We can get together in the town square, and so we talk about the problem, and the people who would fix the problem are actually in that town square. Right, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. Let's go.
Yeah, and you could, in something as small as a town, you could actually step back and see the town as a whole.
That's right.
Whereas with 8 billion people on the planet, you have to take a step. There's too many moving parts, right? So
yeah,
it's out of the line of human perception. It's out of the line of human comprehension.
Yeah. And this is the trouble people are sort of having, and so it's not that so the only thing that has come to as opposed to a Malthusian side of things is when I've actually sort of come across like hedge fund managers, and they've got the perception, well, we're rich, we're independently rich, and it doesn't matter what happens to everyone else, we'll always be okay. The world can burn and we'll still be fine. And that's what they think. And so they're very sanguine about all this. So how do we make more money? And so making war, conflict, terror, these are all things that actually money can be made, which is driving a lot of it. Okay.
Yeah, I was actually called out in one of my comments during our last interview where I was trying to press you in terms of like, what should we in terms of what we should invest in because given the information that and one of the guys in the comments said, this is a perfect example of what's wrong in the world today. One guy saying that the world, all the things that are given, it's trying to prognosticate everything that's wrong in the world, and then the other guy is just trying to make a profit off of it. And so I just thought that was funny.
Well, we're faced with a shift that is so fundamental, like for a society that it's entirely different paradigm. And so we're going to move from a society where we value things, growth and consumption, and we're going to move to a world where we value people and ideas, and each other. Right. Now, we're going to a more collaborative thing. And what's really hard is how do we transfer that mentality into a space where we can do industrial design, and we can put things on the ground like a power plant. And so the only way around that is to scale back what we're doing. So instead of building like massive structures, we'll build medium-sized structures or smaller structures to the point where it's a smaller number of people that can choose to work with each other for reasons other than money.
Kind of like small
Right.
modular reactors. I mean, that's the entire premise behind small modular reactors. You get like a bathtub-sized nuclear reactor, and it's placed in a town. It's
Yeah.
decentralize it from the rest of the grid.
Yeah. I actually saw one, by the way.
Really?
I went out to Copenhagen Atomics, and their full system will be sort of up and running and visible in a couple of years' time. But I saw one of their test rigs, and they're developing a 100 megawatt system for thermal power, or 40 megawatts of electricity in a 40-foot shipping container size unit. And 50 years of fuel can be loaded into this thing at the point of commissioning, right? So, and they're planning to make one of these a day, and so the plan is they're actually going to go and connect so many of them together. I actually got a photo of this I can show you if you like.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you for one.
Yeah, hang on. So you actually see this. Can you see it?
Oh yeah.
Right. So that's me with the CEO at
Well, it's actually
Tom.
a little bit bigger than a bathtub, as I alluded to.
So that is a half the system. That's a test rig to test the water circuit. The actual reactor is behind me and it's about a sphere of about 1.2 meters in diameter. Right. And so the rest of that unit is to test the water regulation circuit, and on the other side of that would be a series of salt loops that would transfer heat. And so the whole system is 40 like a 40-foot container with all the safety gear and all the fuel and everything, and that would generate heat at about 560 degrees Celsius by the time it comes through the loop. So yeah, so this is what they were showing, and they're planning to sell power at 2 cents a kilowatt.
Oh, and it's also thorium
It's a
based.
thorium unit,
Okay.
but their system could also run on a uranium salt as well.
And
Right.
so, what about when people say, how can you bet on human innovation? And if we keep using energy, it propagates more innovation in the process. So how can we say, we're just dealing with the hand that we've been dealt at this very moment? That hand can change in 10, 20, 30 years time when more innovation comes down the line through the likes of thorium reactors, et cetera.
Well, so here's the problem. When people say human innovation is a great thing, what they're really saying is shut up and leave me alone. Stop making me feel uncomfortable. And then when they say, how could you bet on human innovation? Well, these blanket statements what they're saying there, for example, is we are facing a number of problems that have been delayed by let me stop that now that you've seen it. That have been delayed. Yeah, a whole lot of problems that we've simply just stopped looking at because we had lots of money and lots of energy and abundant resources, so we didn't have to face it. So there's whole things like that. How do we actually sort of the real problem we are facing is an ecological one. Acidification of the oceans, degradation of the land, where we've got
It's
food,
parameterized. We have to work within
yeah,
certain parameters.
yeah. So we've got to face a whole series of things about us as a society where we've got to choose to be part of the planetary environment, or face our own destruction. All right. So when people say, oh, how could you bet on human innovation? Because innovation has been for the last 50 years all about making money in a tiny window that assumes everything else is fine. But really what's going to happen is we're now going to be facing multiple problems at the same time, and we've now got to become aware of them. And now we've got to respond to them, right? And so we're in the process of doing that now. And so it takes time to do these things. So the people who actually criticize the idea of human innovation, that's rubbish. What they're really saying is they want to see anarchy and Mad Max, and we're going to kill each other, right? And in that environment, they're going to innovate. You know, so
With a gun pointed to your head, the greatest
so
innovations are bred.
what I'm also saying is conventional ways of doing things will evolve. How we see things will evolve. I think we'll be forced into an environment where we see things as a system, both in terms of the problems that we see and the solutions we might bring to the table. Right. And most people cannot get their arms around that, like, because everyone is conditioned just to defend their little patch, to just do their little bit and just trust that everything else is fine. And not only that, it's not their business what everyone else is doing. Right. And so our belief in how we are going forward and what we are doing is completely skewed. And so we have these pat throwaway memes, almost these platitudes that we sort of talk about that are quite self-defeating. We don't necessarily have to be that way.
Yeah. So last time you mentioned geothermal is one solution, nuclear is another solution. Um, how is that looking like as a viable solution? I know nuclear is being adopted on a more
Well,
much
conventional
more
nuclear,
widely.
conventional nuclear has
Conventional.
conventional nuclear has the problem is it cannot expand fast enough to be useful. We're taking like 25 years to build a single reactor. As I understand it, there's 6 or 7 years of build time in that, but the incubation period of getting permits and through it's taking such a long time to bring reactors online, and so even if we brought online 25 new reactors of average size a year, each year and every year from 2025 onwards, we would chew through all our uranium reserves that we've got at the moment in about 75 years. Now, we can go and find more. That's not a problem. Right. But in that 75 years, we get like about 60% of the way there for nuclear to generate enough power to become the next energy system that underpins everything. So conventional nuclear has to evolve. Every single system I've looked at requires some sort of evolution because it faces a bottleneck. And like wind and solar, I'm now able to say things like, I believe wind and solar will struggle, not only because the materials needed and the manufacturing capacity needed, but the intermittent nature of their power production is we actually don't have the technology to store such a lot of power to manage that intermittency, even at the 6 hour level, which is what conventional thinking is. But the real number could be out as much as 12 weeks, which that's just not possible. So every single one of these things needs some sort of breakthrough to make it happen. If we were able to, for example, have technology, electronics that could handle variable power, we don't need the buffer. Or if we work out a way to store such a vast amount of energy, then wind and solar's back on. Things like that. So nuclear, well, it'll evolve. The molten salt, the thorium molten salt modular reactor idea is an evolution, and that looks like it might work. Geothermal, we've been waiting on a breakthrough in deep drilling, where we can drill down to, like, say, 10 kilometers quickly and easily. We haven't been able to, like, there's been lots of promises, but we haven't been able to do that yet. But even once we do that, we've got to get the hot fluid, enough water down to that depth, and then the water flow between the two wells, and then enough heat to back up to the surface to be useful. That's hard because those drill holes will have faults, intersecting faults, where they will lose pressure through those faults. Right. So geothermal, it looked like it was going to have a breakthrough, but hasn't happened yet. In the meantime, there's other things. There's another system that's coming online now where they're looking at, say, burning iron powder. And as it goes from iron to iron oxide, it's producing a lot of heat exothermically. It could replace coal if we set ourselves up for it. So, and that's got all sorts of applications. So I'm looking.
How much more energy dense is it versus coal? Do you know?
Coal's a much more effective energy system, I believe, because it is it's a pretty dense energy source and it has potential. There are questions about it that need to be resolved, though. For example, how much iron powder do we need? And as at the moment, for example, if to make 1 megawatt hour of heat, you need about 500 kilograms of iron powder. Okay. Um, and then there's a return limit. It's a new technology that's just still sort of coming out, and it's like one of these new ideas. If it works, I don't think there's a magic bullet. I don't think there's one system that will just solve everything. We're going to have lots and lots of different systems, lots of different battery chemistries, lots of different power generation systems, and they all have their place. And it's going to be a very, very diverse and complicated system compared to what we have now. And yeah, anyway, so each one of these systems will have to evolve or be left behind.
So why would, if coal is a much more effective way of form of energy, why would this replace coal?
So coal is a fossil fuels, they want to get rid of it, but
Oh
also,
yeah.
yeah, well, but you've also got the problem of China controls most of the coal left on the planet,
Hmm.
right? So a lot of the coal in Australia, for example, is spoken for by Chinese power stations. And so then you've got the problem of coal is finite, and there will come a point when the grade of coal that we're burning is no longer good enough. So we've got plenty of coal left, but it's all the shit stuff, right? So the calorific value of coal, that they have it's okay for steaming, but it's not good enough for metallurgical applications, right? So the resources are finite, but it's not a case of it cuts and it stops. We're using up all the good quality stuff up, and this is
Yeah.
all resources on all fronts, but they're all degrading as we're consuming them. So one way or another, regardless of what ideology you subscribe to, all fossil fuels will be phased out in the next couple of decades for one reason or another. And okay, oil's what we've all been focusing on, but gas and coal are like the elephant in the room that we just haven't really thought about. And most manufacture depends on heat made from burning coal. Um, yeah. So
Yeah. So you mentioned that, we're using up all the good stuff, resources are finite, et cetera. What do you think of the abiotic theory of oil? Do you have any
right. So
thoughts on that?
there's a few friends of mine who subscribe to this, and
And for those who don't know, can you explain it to them?
okay, the idea of abiotic oil is not actually a fossil fuel at all. It's actually a chemical outcome of geological processes, and they are the reserves that have been tapped out will replenish over time, right? And so the idea is we're sitting on massive reserves of oil at a really, really deep level. Right. So for me to actually sort of say, okay, let's look at this, I would like to see a report with some proper numbers and some proper science behind it, because it's almost always a talking head saying, yes, this happens. Right. And we're in an era of such deceit where a lot of information is put out there in a malicious attempt to direct our attention away from one thing versus another thing. So what I'm sort of saying is, I'm open to the idea of abiotic oil, but I've yet to see something to show me that it is actually correct. It might be that it oil does replenish at some level, but but it's at a very, very small rate, far smaller than what we're consuming oil. And then there's the concept of if these reserves are indeed replenishing, we're not managing them that way. So we're stripping them out faster than they can replenish anyway. Right. So it's a complicated way of saying we don't know what we're doing. Um, if that is the case, if abiotic oil is a thing, well, we need some definitive technical information to come out from that. The proof in the pudding, for example, the in the Art Berman did a nice piece of work which he showed on Nate Hagen's Great Simplification. Um, that sloping sound, I think, is what it's called. But the actual production of productivity of all the wells in the tight oil sector in the US sector has been declining, right? And so production's going up, but they're sweating the asset. They're making the asset. They're extracting as much oil in the short term for short term gain but they're destroying the long-term prospects of the stewardship of that resource. So the proof in the pudding for abiotic oil is, okay, when production does stop, does it replenish? Or are we sort of seeing these when we withdraw from these oil and gas fields and they're tapped out, do they stay tapped out?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would have thought we've got enough examples of tapped out fields now to actually sort of show at least some examples of that.
And,
I haven't seen any yet. Yeah.
okay.
So I don't like saying that idea is incorrect, right? Because usually what happens is the thinking behind or any idea for that matter, because the thinking behind these sort of things is usually like from a different point of view or a different paradigm. And it often sort of comes like pertinent information. So remember the concept of peak oil. Right, so peak oil in 2005, we all were all convinced it was going to happen. Right, well then tight oil comes in and fracking. And so that bought us an extra 10, 15 years. And so now we've got to the point where we actually have already seen peak oil, in my opinion, in November 2018. Right, but now what's happening is we're getting what we call gasoline from other sources. Like some products from the liquid gas industry are now producing gasoline, and now we're getting it from biofuels. Right, so what we call peak oil needs to evolve. Pertinent information comes in, and we've got to sort of think differently. So I would prefer to stay open-minded. And for now, on the abiotic oil thing, I would rather say I haven't seen anything yet to support that it's actually a correct thesis.
So what you're saying is gasoline, as we know it today,
Yep.
a higher share of it comes from biofuels
Correct.
versus from
And
crude oil.
it's a crude oil is still producing the lion's share of it, but a greater proportion of that cup is now coming from natural gas
Yeah,
liquids.
and that's why you don't see this loosening of correlation between the oil price and the gasoline price, for example.
Yeah, yeah. So it's still definitely there, and oil and gas are often found together and they're processed together. Excuse me, by the same companies,
Yeah,
right? And so while that's the case, they're joined at the hip.
correct. So I want to show you something really quick. I'm sure
Mhm.
you've seen this. Let's see. Let me know if you can see the screen. But
Okay.
this is oil demand over time.
Mhm.
And 2020, when we shut down the entire world, oil demand went from 100, what is it, 100 million barrels a day, 100
Mhm.
million barrels a day to 91. So even in the greatest of economic contractions, you only saw a 10% decrease in
Mhm.
oil demand. So how is,
Go to production. That's
but
demand. Go to
yeah,
go see if you can find production. See what they include in production of some things is actually biofuels as well. So it's really hard to actually sort of get information. Yeah. So go to
oh, I've got to have a
is
second
that
account.
oil or is that crude? Yeah. Anyway, whatever. Go to 2018, 2019. Ah, it won't let you. Oh well.
Yeah. Do you have the graph? Do you have the
No,
chart?
not. Oh, I've got a graph. Yeah, hang on. So hang on. So let me so what I often do is actually use the people work by other people that are good. And the go-to analyst for oil for me has been Art Berman. All right, I got it here. So if I may share my screen.
Huh?
Okay, so this is the first one. This is Art's work. So can you see that?
100%. Yep.
Okay, right. So we've got total liquids consumption. Total liquids is actually not just oil, but it's also biofuels. It's everything you put into a car fuel tank, that we call
Mhm.
fuel. But there is a strong correlation between that and economic GDP.
So
And
you've got
after,
GDP, on the x-axis.
yep, gross domestic product for the world in 2018 versus total liquids consumption for the year of 2018 for that country. So we've got all these different countries.
Mhm.
Tight R squared. Lots of oil, lots of GDP. Not so much oil, not so much GDP. Energy is work done. We are still a petroleum-driven society. All right. So this
Because
is
even if you just go in your backyard and just chop a bunch of wood, I mean that's
mm,
energy consumption because you've got to get you just calories out. So you've got to replace
that's
those
right.
calories with food, and where that food come from, it's got to be shipped in, it's got to be trucked in, and so forth.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So anyway, so this is total liquids, world liquids production. We saw a localized peak in November 2018, and we're on our way. Then there was COVID, right? And we're on our way back to beat that record, we
Mm-hmm.
think. But when we unpack that, the blue down the bottom, that's the oil,
Yeah.
right? So there's our fossil peak oil, and it's declining, and I don't think it's coming back. And
Mm-hmm.
and after seeing Art's latest analysis on the performance of the tight oil wells in the US, I think we're not going to be able to beat that record. That's an opinion. We'll see. But the orange is biofuels, and the dark yellow color is natural gas liquid. Right. So, all right, how are we doing? So this is the chart that he's actually sort of put together, um, where the dark orange is crude and condensate. That's peaked and has declined and never actually recovers. Right. But the
Mm-hmm.
NGL sector is able to expand. So we can expand for the next 3 years to 2027. So next year is 2024. So it's 4 or now 3 years away. Right. And a lot of this is actually based on capital that's not been has been promised but not secured yet, and you've got to have capital up front. So will we even be able to do that? Remains to be seen. um, yeah, and so this is actually showing the idea that we might see total peak oil soon, where we're pulling it from all these different sources. And so yeah. Anyway,
So
so
we're
so
so we're you, this chart tells us that we should peak sometime around 2027.
that's the projection at the moment, unless something spectacular happens, like see, you can't just discover oil and produce it. It takes years to develop the infrastructure.
And
So something that's already in development might come out and be like 1,000% more effective, and
yeah,
that'll change.
yeah, and isn't most of this growth attributed to North America?
Yes, and, more than 95% is coming from North America, in the fracking tight oil sector and the Canadian tar sands, where the only growing section is the Permian Basin. Everything else is now in decline.
Mm-hmm.
And the performance of the wells in across all, not only the Permian but also other ones, but year on year, they're not performing as well. So they're bringing more wells on, so they're producing more oil than ever before, but they're having to do more work to get that oil. And in my opinion, they're doing what the Saudi Arabians did when they were back in 2014 and 2018. They just drew a whole lot of new wells to try and sweat their asset. Drill, baby, drill.
Yeah. So I actually have another. I was actually able to pull it up, oil production by region this time around. So I think you might find this interesting.
Oh, what do you mean?
Yeah. So this is oil production, crude oil production, and
Hmm?
it's broken down by region. And as you
Yeah,
can see here, where is it? North America, you've got here in blue. It's pretty much the only growth
yeah.
sector across all of these. So if you filter it out, all of a sudden, I mean, you can clearly see the declining trend here starting to
Mm.
form. But it's really just that you've alluded to, just
Yeah,
that shale revolution that we were so lucky to have over the last 10 years.
yeah. So it's brought us an extra 10 to 15 years in reality. And so what have we done with that time? Well, not a lot. So that's not saying is if we actually understood the information that was available to us back in 2005, it's all right, we've now got the fracking boom. We should have used that time and energy to accelerate the discussion about what do we do next.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, we all went to sleep and just go, well, it's a bonanza, we're getting rich,
Yeah.
pass the salt, leave us alone.
it has to work out, Simon. That's, I mean, that's the mentality. Like, it just it has to work out. Like, it's just like it's like a sitcom. Like, it just can't fall apart, right?
Yeah. And so yeah, we're in an episode of Jerry Seinfeld. That's great.
Yeah.
so,
Feel better now?
so yeah, but this is the strange thing about how we do things is the phrase is like, oh, it has to work out, failure is not an option. We're, in the current era of history, like on the bookcase behind you, you've got Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley.
Yep.
He wrote another book called The Evolution of Civilizations. And so he's actually sort of looking at how civilizations actually met these problems. And a lot of the times things ended very poorly. And we've been very lucky for the last 80 years.
Oh, so there's precedence to something like
Oh,
this,
God, yes.
like
Oh,
energy
God.
shortages and so forth. Okay, yeah, yes.
Yeah, but
Go through.
not the same way like in industrialization,
Hmm.
but other things like 12th century BC, the Bronze Age collapsed. Like all these Bronze Age civilizations just stopped, and it's been suggested that that possibly was like a volcanic eruption. But what was the rate determining step was they couldn't produce tin anymore.
Mm.
And because they couldn't produce tin, they couldn't produce the bronze. Because they used the bronze, then a lot of their metal artifacts that they normally couldn't work, and everything went sideways. So something important was disrupted. So I got the idea that the commodities industry has been misunderstood. Now we say the word energy, but when you see energy, there is the technology to harvest that energy and the technology to use that energy. Then there's the raw materials that that energy is based on, right? And so then you've got the money side of things. Is it viable? There's four aspects, and when you've got when you see one, you see the other three, and you cannot divide them, right? So energy is the master resource, but I think as a society we've actually misunderstood what it really is. And so yeah. Anyway, so I'm slowly pulling together these sort of ideas because that actually tells us what has to happen next.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, we've forgotten what energy really is because we've had it so good for so long. You've taken it for granted,
Yeah, that's right.
and you take for granted that's like this water bottle here. I mean, this is a piece of energy, right? It's got plastics, it's got water, and it's been shipped here, etc. And if without any energy doesn't exist, you're gonna have to like find a local creek or something and try to filter that water out yourself.
Right. Yeah, and so when we sort of look at the world, we look at through the world of how the stock market's doing. That or what our celebrity chefs are doing these days. Or for the last couple of years, for example, in America in particular, they've been more concerned about who's been going to the bathroom.
Right.
Yeah, come on, guys. Food shortages,
Yeah. Yeah. These are all symptoms of low interest rates and just
Yeah,
very a very high energy and output intensive society. So when you have the luxury of using turning your AC all the way down to 65 degrees in the summertime here and like in the South where I live, or just like turning your heat all the way up, you don't think about this stuff. You just think it's a given.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, so these are the problems that we're facing. Um, it's a problem of complexity. Because the problems are so complex, most people can't get their arms around it, and they don't know what to do about it according to that. So it will be very difficult to plan the response. There are some things I'm sort of looking at. Like I'm planning to work with the Venus Project in my next professional era. The Venus Project was founded by Jacques Fresco in the late 70s. And him and his partner Roxanne Meadows have been developing it for the last couple of decades. Jacques passed on in 2016, but Roxanne's got a team of people around her and it's still going. So they had the idea of a society that if you were to build a human settlement using the best that science and engineering had to offer, best methods, but you were to optimize that society to the quality of life of the people living there, what would that society look like? Right. So that was the mandate, and which is brilliant. Um, So a lot of their ideas were sort of developed decades ago, right? And a lot of the challenges we now face today weren't visible back then, but they are now. And so the Venus project work is merging with my work, and I'm pulling in stuff from all over the place. And together developing the next generation of Venus design. I call it Venus evolution.
Do you have
Right.
any to show the audience or?